This is the Agent Carter podcast on Defenders TV Podcast. Episode 4 of Season 1, The Blitzkrieg Button. Welcome back, Defenders. This is Defenders TV Podcast, Episode 23, where we will be looking at Agent Carter Episode 4, The Blitzkrieg Button, involving Howard Stark and the regulars from Peggy Carter and Edwin Jarvis. I am one of your hosts, John.
And I'm Derek, your other host. This is Defenders TV Podcast Episode 23.
I know.
Doing cracking through the episodes, really.
Cracking through them, absolutely. Yeah. And what's going to be our 24th?
It will be the fantastic 24th episode of Defenders TV Podcast, as we're going to the cinema to see Fantastic Four, the new Fox movie based on the Marvel characters. So we thought we'd go out and check it out and bring you our thoughts. So we're going to see that tomorrow night as we record, so that's the 4th of August, and an early preview screening, but we're going to have our podcast up later in the week, and that'll be our next podcast. So make sure you let us know your feedback if you have any thoughts about the movie, if you have any interest in hearing that podcast, you'll hear it coming up. You can send your feedback to feedback@defenderstvpodcast.com, as always. You can also follow us on Twitter @DefendersCast and send your feedback in through there.
And of course, we'll be back as well as regular next week with episode 5 of Agent Carter. Mm-hmm. And you can find us on www.defenderstvpodcast.com/iTunes to listen to us on our weekly podcast of Agent Carter, and also Daredevil and some of the Marvel releases this year in 2015. You can also find us on any other good podcast catcher, such as Stitcher or Player FM. Just search Defenders TV Podcast.
Absolutely.
So just before we get into this episode, we've got a little bit of feedback from a listener.
Yeah, we got a bit of feedback from Peony Moss on Twitter. She says, enjoying the podcast. Thank you very much, Peony. She says, one note, Thompson's the one who insults Krasinski as the office idiot in episode 3. Thanks very much for the feedback, Peony. If you guys do see anything that we've missed or I suppose missaid, make sure you get in contact with us. I had a look back at episode 3, and I was slightly correct and incorrect, I suppose. The scene I was speaking about was where Sousa is commenting on the fact that Krasinski's not the brightest tool in the box, I guess. That's probably mixing two metaphors there. Not the sharpest tool in the box, yes. But the other scene, you are absolutely right. Thompson does put down Krasinski as being an office idiot and is told by Dooley not to be that guy, essentially. So both of us are correct, I suppose. Thanks very much for listening, obviously, Peony, and thanks very much for pointing out a little difference, I suppose, in what we said and what you'd seen in the episode. But yeah, thanks for listening as well.
Yeah, thank you, Peony, for listening. And just remember, any feedback you can send through at DefendersCast on Twitter or feedback@defenderstvpodcast.com. So please send in your thoughts and give us your ideas, and we're more than happy to discuss them.
So with our favourite named episode so far, the Blitzkrieg Button, love it. Really good. I think it's time to take us on to the synopsis, John. This episode was directed by Stephen Cragg and written by Brant Engelstein. So let us know what we got, John.
Federal fugitive Howard Stark makes an audacious yet secretive return to the USA, smuggled into the country by Edwin Jarvis and Agent Peggy Carter using Otto Mink's smuggling network. However, once smuggled into the USA, Howard is then smuggled back to Carter's women's-only apartment at the Griffith, his most dangerous and tempting mission so far. Meanwhile, as the Strategic Scientific Reserve, the SSR, continue to investigate Howard Stark, Chief Dooley chases a new clue, former Nazi Colonel Ernst Muller, all the way to Europe. He visits a German prison to extract information from Muller about the dead Russians and the massacre at the Battle of Finau, where the Germans supposedly massacred a battalion of Russians. As Peggy begins surveillance of the SSR using a camera pen of Howard's own invention, he identifies the primed Blitzkrieg Button, a weapon that is deadly, active, and one that Peggy must get back. As she breaks into the laboratories of the SSR to swap out the real Blitzkrieg Button for a mock-up, her instincts inform her that all is not right, and Howard and Jarvis have not been telling her the whole truth. Back at her apartment, she confronts Howard, learning that the device has an important piece of her past. As Peggy hides the Blitzkrieg button in her apartment wall, another revelation is revealed across the hallway as Carter's new neighbour, Dottie Underwood, apparently a small-town ballerina from Iowa, is not all who she appears to be.
But she does have a great ballerina move, doesn't she?
Yeah, kick-ass ballerina move.
I am sure we'll be talking about that as we go.
Well, I think getting on those tippy toes, strength, agility.
Yeah, absolutely.
Deadly muscle twitches to cause those spins and pirouettes.
Definitely. I'm really intrigued to find out a little bit more about
hours
Dottie.
and hours in front of the mirror, looking at oneself, going, look how beautiful and gorgeous I am.
Is that all the ballerina does, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Men and female. Male and female ballerinas.
If this is your first episode listening to our Peggy Carter coverage, go back and listen to the other ones as well. But if this is your first episode, the way we cover our shows on Defenders TV podcast is we talk about 5 points each that stood out about this episode and each episode of the show. So, John, do you want to kick us off with your first point?
I am. I'm going to say Dottie Underwood. Who are you and where did you come from? Mm-hmm. Obviously not Iowa. And obviously with that Otto Mink, who she does a little parquet up the wall and straight round his neck with her thighs and a little crack, and Bob's your uncle and Dottie's your aunt and Otto Mink's a goner.
Yeah.
So supposedly a ballerina for Iowa, very Midwest kind of country sounding. Innocent, naive, maybe, is what we've learnt to believe so far. But now she chucks out the moves, and with a kind of a slight velociraptor twitch of the head as well, decides that she kind of likes Otto Mink's automatic pistol that he has in his hands, with a little cock of a head to one side. Before you knew it, deadly move executed, and he's dead on the floor, dragged through and put under the bed for another day. Hopefully she's not storing him in a kind of a larder.
I hope not.
Yeah.
I think you might have been watching a little bit too much Hannibal recently,
maybe,
John.
actually.
I think
beginning
he's
to
just
affect
dead.
me.
He's just dead. This was the most shocking moment so far in the series, really, for me. I wasn't expecting it at all. You made a mention last week about Dottie being the new resident of the Griffith Hotel, and that it stood out to you that she was being introduced around to some of the other characters, but it really didn't get me. I think I may have even made the comment that I thought she was just someone that was lined up for the residence, but obviously she's now the new neighbour of Peggy, so possibly a bit of a concern.
Yeah, I think it's just that I want that. She looks at him and sort of then executes the move, but I think with that we definitely have to all be friends of Dorothy, otherwise she might kill you.
yeah, absolutely. But it was really surprised, particularly because of Minx throughout this episode. The casting of the actor and his performance in the show made it look like he was going to be the new big bad. So I was really surprised that I'm being taken out so easily by Dottie.
Yeah, he was introduced right at the start. He had helped smuggle Howard Stark into the country. Obviously, he'd been slightly double-crossed by Peggy and Jarvis. He was then tracking them down. He'd killed the two guys who were there to make the payment and the switch of Howard Stark to Peggy and Jarvis. Killed them because they weren't up to the task and felt they had failed him. Was being pretty clever, had infiltrated into the Griffith, and then was taken out in one sort of quick move from Dottie. She definitely has got the moves here, and I think as you say, it's like Otto Mink was played by Gregory Sporleader, and it's like it's one of those faces immediately that kind of pops out at you. You go, well, I recognise you. Yeah. What have you been in? You start looking.
What was he?
Well, he was in The Rock, which is my
Classic.
one of my favourite films. Yes, that great movie. He was one of the kind of crazy army dudes who was trying to actually fire the biological weapons into San Francisco.
This is the Nicolas Cage film and Sean Connery film.
Yeah. Really, really good.
Another one of your classics to add to your
Face
collection.
Off.
right
Yes,
now.
exactly.
Okay.
I think we have to appreciate some of those mid-90s films. They're fairly underrated, but great entertainment. Absolutely. But he's one of the army guys that kind of loses it slightly. He's kind of, on the edge and twitchy. But he was also in Being John Malkovich as well. And he was in Black Hawk Down as well. So, you would have noticed him. And it is one of those faces that just pops out at you from the screen.
Yeah, and I do love that you went for the Rock rather than Being John Malkovich. Malkovich. That's my classic.
You've got to love The Rock.
Okay, we may have to.
Derek, what's your first point?
My first point is also in the Griffith. It is the return of Howard Stark, who spends some time at the Griffith with Agent Carter. I absolutely love Howard Stark's character. I love how they build him up in this episode. We hear about him being a womanizer right back to Captain America, the first Avenger. You just kind of hear about it, but you don't really see it. You know that he's a billionaire playboy kind of thing. A little bit like Batman, a little bit like Tony Stark, obviously. But this is really shown in this episode when he arrives at the Griffith, and as he's being taken there by Carter, she says where she's living, and he immediately goes, "How's Miriam?" Because he clearly has infiltrated the Griffith many times to meet some of the young ladies under the roof. Twice in the episode, he's found in two of the other girls' rooms. He's found with Lorraine, while Peggy is really nervous that he's going to be caught by Miriam. He's already snuck into another girl's room to have a late-night dalliance with her. And then
he is like a child in a sweet shop. I love it. It's just the mischief that goes across his face. His moustache begins to bristle. The possibility and opportunity that this whole little house and hotel provides for him. Yeah, I love it.
Absolutely, yeah. And when Peggy comes back from work after doing all of her work for him, of taking the photographs of the equipment that's been stolen, she comes back to find him in another girl's room, in Helen's room this time, as Peggy is being introduced to all the members of the hotel as his cousin, essentially. So
at least he didn't find his way into Dottie's room, otherwise he could have been well and truly hung out to dry.
That's true. More likely under the bed than on the bed with Dottie.
Probably got further with Miriam than he would have with Dottie.
Yes, but I loved his quips in this episode. I loved the playboy nature. Finally seeing a bit of that on screen.
Absolutely,
and you can tell how much of an annoyance he is to Agent Carter in this episode. Definitely great to see him back. I don't think we're going to see a huge amount more of Dominic Cooper on the series. I believe he's in and out of the episodes, but I am delighted that we got definitely a big episode for him this time. So, John, do you want to give your second point?
Yeah, it's the gadgets and the weapons. You've kind of alluded to the camera pen. I love that really kind of 007 James Bond proper spy espionage thing going on, and I love the way that Peggy uses it while she's in the lab, and she's kind of like going just over the shoulder of one of the lab attendants as he's going through some of the stuff on the lab bench, and she's just kind of firing, shooting the camera at different points to take pictures of all the weapons that were seized on the ship in last week's episode.
Yeah.
And that was just really, I liked that. I think, when they're developing the pictures from the camera pen, she goes, "Oh, she's inhibited," and Howard goes, "The first 10 pictures are of a very different nature." It's obviously from some dalliance that he's had, and as they're developing those pictures, I love that in the laboratory in the SSR, you've got the guys in the background, and you don't know quite what they're maybe investigating in terms of the weapons, but one of them is continually getting his forearm on fire. 1 minute the flame's green, 1 minute the flame's blue, 1 minute the flame's purple, and one of his colleagues trying to put him out, and you're like, what are they playing with here? Really like that. And then of course you have the big the Blitzkrieg button, and the fact that you're told initially that it can wipe out all the electrics of New York, that it's active, it's primed, ready to go, unlike any of the other weapons, and that this can have really serious consequences then for New York, because he can turn off all the lights, but he doesn't know how to turn them all back on. But as well, then we see that this is a red herring. This is a ruse to something entirely different that's housed within that sphere.
Yeah, luckily it is. Peggy doesn't waste much time. I know she has her suspicions and she is a good investigator, as we've learned, but she doesn't really waste much time in pressing the button, does she? Once she doesn't trust Howard, she's just presuming that he's lying to her and there's something hidden within the sphere. But very good possibility that maybe he was lying about exactly what the button did, that it maybe did something else. But yeah, we'll probably talk about that a little bit later on. I'm going to save the Blitzkrieg button, what actually it is. I loved some of the little reactions in there when he gives the camera pen to Peggy, and her reaction just going, all this for a camera pen, as if she's seen 100 of them before. This is the first one ever invented, essentially, but she's not impressed in the slightest by Howard's style. And one other thing I wanted to say about the inventions, a little bit of comic book knowledge for you. The first ever issue of Nick Fury's introduction to S.H.I.E.L.D., back in the 60s, in issue 135 of Strange Tales, Nick Fury is introduced to S.H.I.E.L.D. by Howard Stark, and he's the one that provides S.H.I.E.L.D. with all their equipment. He's the one that actually set up S.H.I.E.L.D. essentially in the original comics. That's been kind of changed a couple of times over the decades that have happened since the original S.H.I.E.L.D., but yeah, it is Howard Stark that introduces Nick Fury with all the gadgets to S.H.I.E.L.D.
Excellent,
So I just thought it was quite an interesting little point.
Yeah, so Derek, what's your second point?
My second point is actually a bit of intrigue from this episode, but a huge bit of intrigue, really. It's the Battle of Finnow. I'm really intrigued by this story that essentially is being built up over the last couple of episodes with people just dropping a mention of the Battle of Finnow. We tend to be following Peggy Carter and what's happening with her and her investigation to clear Howard Stark. But the investigation that's going on in the SSR has now made quite a big turn, essentially. Both of the Russians that died in the second episode.
Leet Brennis.
That's right.
Leet Brannis. And obviously the man in the green suit, the Quiet Men, with their voice box taken out. Both of them alive, operating in New York after World War II, but their records show that they both died at the Battle of Finnow.
Yeah.
You have that one of the generals that was there has retired and has been indicted as well previously, and all this there's something going on in Russia that is building and developing, obviously something to do with Leviathan maybe. There's the typewriter, and you've got Agent Thompson, and you've got Chief Dooley going, is it a long-range communication device to, can it reach Russia?
Yeah.
So there's obviously a Cold War flavour coming in here as well. And yeah, this was one of my points as well, was the intrigue that's been generated from the Battle of Finnow. So I shall also hook into your second point. And I love this whole move of Chief Dooley, who heads across to Germany to visit a former Nazi Colonel Muller, in a prison cell in Berlin, and it's just really, really good. You start to learn a lot more. That he says, "I've killed many people, but when we arrived there, all the Russians were dead before we got there, torn apart. It wasn't even a few of them." He said all of them, and then it builds in then to even more intrigue, and the plot really thickens for Howard Stark, which is there is a record of Americans arriving at Finnow 2 or 3 days after the battle, in inverted commas, and on that inventory, on that list of people, is Howard Stark, and this just adds more to the plot of what's the Battle of Finnow, what actually happened there, why was Howard Stark there. Obviously, again, is it something tech orientated, or how does that kind of play out? And I think, again, it just makes that the whole reason why Howard Stark has come back. It does actually, in hindsight, to me, it makes it more obvious that he was trying to hide something from Peggy Carter, and that his intentions on why he came back at such a critical moment. You've got the SSR are really gunning for him now after the loss of Krasinski.
Absolutely.
But he's coming back, and he's coming back to get one of his weapons, which he could have just told them to get and bring back and take out of the SSR laboratories without the need for him to be there. But this sphere, this Blitzkrieg button, obviously is something different. But again, then with the Battle of Finau, it's just more and more arrows pointing towards Howard Stark on the investigation by the SSR.
Well, absolutely. Well, exactly to the point. Essentially, when Chief Dooley goes to Germany and meets Colonel Muller, I love the exchange between the two of them, because you finally get some details about the Battle of Finau. And the first detail you get is there was no Battle of Finau. There's no battle at all. It was a massacre, is essentially what Colonel Muller tells Chief Dooley. I'm very close to calling him Muller Rice here, so I'm wondering if his descendants may have had something to do with yogurt at all. But essentially, he tells Dooley that there was no Battle of Finau. It was a massacre. Whoever attacked them was long gone by the time they arrived, and no person died at German hands at Finau, which is very interesting, I think.
Yeah, and he says the bodies were piled high and ripped apart. I mean, gruesome sounding stuff, really.
Absolutely. I'm sure we're going to learn a lot more about this as the episodes go on, but that's definitely one of my points, is just that the intrigue that Finau now has caused in the show. Really, really good idea. Really, really good storyline.
And I love the little deal that Dooley offers Muller, which is the cyanide pill, which ultimately turns out to be a breath mint.
Yeah.
Like, it's a nice little sort of light touch, I thought, for a show that is seen to be showing a cyanide pill exchanging hands, that in fact it's a breath mint.
Yes. Now, you say a light touch. I don't know. I think it shows that Dooley would never give a way out to a mass murderer like Muller. He's essentially saying to him, I'll do this for you so you can have an easy death and you won't have to die by a noose. He gives him the cyanide pill and then leaves. So this guy thinks he's got a way of killing himself without being hanged, but he doesn't. So Dooley's actually sending him off to the gallows anyway, which I think is
with fresh breath.
Yeah, with fresh breath, exactly. John, what's your next point?
My next point is the exchange between Peggy and Thompson. And it's an exchange, I think, that kind of reflects back to the exchange last week between Jarvis and Peggy, where he says that you have to clear Howard's name from the shadows. You can't just walk in and tell them it's not Howard. It will implicate you, and you will be drawn into this. And it's kind of Jarvis was kind of saying, whilst I don't agree with the world, this is how the world is, and they won't trust you as a woman, and they won't necessarily respect that you have done this, and they will just try to then embroil you, and it will probably be an embroilment that is apparently, you were flirting with him, or you're, one of his conquests.
Yeah. Because
that's how it is. And Thompson kind of has the same type of exchange with Peggy, and it's one of the things that I'm really enjoying from this show is how they're weaving in a social commentary, I think, of that society at that time into the dialogue, into some of the exchanges between characters. And, Thompson's asking her, you're hiding from yourself. He talks about the natural order, and no matter how much you want it, it's not going to come true. It won't change. It doesn't make it change. You're always a woman. I mean, really harsh stuff.
Absolutely.
Always a woman in a man's world. And it's kind of, he's questioning her. Why are you here? What is the thrill in taking the lunch menu every day? He's underestimating her, because for Thompson, he doesn't see that she can be an agent like him. And that's a really sort of sad take on women in society, but that was prevalent at that time, and that's why it's been brought out here in these exchanges, and it really grates and is really harsh for an audience of today. When you hear that, but it is kind of giving a truth that was apparent at that time, even though there were people fighting against it. And I think one of the other interesting things is that Thompson does say that whilst he may or may not really care about it, he's kind of ambivalent. And in some ways, that is the issue, is that he could be up there banging the drum for Peggy, giving her cases rather than a sandwich order, but is ambivalent and stands back and doesn't put his in a sense, his neck on the line. Not that he's risking much by supporting a female and a woman in the workplace. I really liked that, and I thought it echoed from a different perspective what Jarvis kind of was saying, as a warning to her that this is how it would be viewed in the SSR by people like Agent Thompson. And it's kind of almost showing that he was right, and he was right to warn Peggy in last week's episode. And I thought, however brutal it was a great exchange.
Yeah, no, I agree, definitely. And I definitely take the point about how Jarvis talked to her as well. But I suppose the great thing about how Jarvis talked to her was that he was giving her a friendly warning that so that she didn't lose the power of what she'd found.
Absolutely.
Which is great. And he was doing it from a point of view of, well, I care for you, obviously. My wife is in a similar situation to the way you are. I obviously treat women with respect. The big difference between Chad Michael Murray's Thompson character is that what his opinions are abhorrent. They're absolutely, he says, no man will ever consider you equal, meaning including myself, essentially, which is a horrible truth, I suppose, to present to Agent Carter. Again, we spoke about it before in the last couple of episodes. She had reached such a high level in the army before going back to the 40s America, where she's now treated just like somebody that should be cleaning the room. But I do have one question for the listeners out there. Anybody, please send us in feedback to feedback@defenderstvpodcast.com to tell me, why does he keep calling her Marge every time he's asking her to get the lunch order?
That's true, actually.
Is a Marge, is this supposed to mean something that we just don't understand because of the passage of time? I'd love to know. So I couldn't find anything on the internet after looking it up. Again, I'm trying not to spoil future episodes. So if there's something there that I didn't find because there was spoilers for future episodes, maybe that's it. But if you want to send us in your answers as to why Peggy is called Marge, because he clearly knows who she is. He clearly knows her name. So I don't know. Send them into feedback@defenderstvpodcast.com.
But Derek, what's your next point then?
My one is about the other kind of speech, I suppose, in the episode. It's Agent Sousa. Once again, we're seeing kind of the world from his viewpoint as well. He takes into custody a bum who obviously has come back from war, and the two of them sit and have a discussion, much essentially kind of forcing the bum to listen to Sousa's thoughts, I suppose. But I love the way that the scene is described by Sousa when he arrived home wearing his dress greens, and walked into a cafe essentially. And as he walked in, people stood up and clapped for him. He thought originally it was because he was a GI returning from war, and everybody had this opinion about all GIs. But then realised that actually the reason why people were clapping for him was because he's an injured GI. I think this is such a great way to put across the point that, you know, he's only getting the respect of people because of his injury. It's not for him, it's because they felt sorry for him and they want to make themselves feel better. So this is what Sousa has to put up with every single day. He does get the question from Thompson later on in the episode as well, where did you get the leg from? It looks like this is a conversation he's going to have for the rest of his life just because he carries that crutch, you know. But we do see him use it to really good effect during the episode. We see him using the crutch to take out someone that's attacking him, the bum who originally tries to punch him. Takes him out, knocks him to the ground. But I think it's also a great moment because you have this exchange and you're hoping that the bum's going to give up the information, but he doesn't. Thompson's the one that gets the information out of him by, again, doing a very Agent Thompson thing where he comes in, treats the bum exactly like he expects him to be, gives him a bottle of bourbon and a burger, and he gets all the information he needs out of him. He didn't need the discussion or the talk that Sousa was trying to give him. He needed just a bottle of bourbon.
Yeah, it's almost as though Thompson views Agent Sousa's interview as his own therapy, and he sees him, I think, almost even weaker for it. I think, you know, he comes in after the first round of cross-examination and is, you know, clap, 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 you know, that was a great speech. And then he obviously undermines what Sousa is trying to do in terms of his technique by just essentially going straight for the shortest route. Again, it's an ambivalence towards people, and maybe he gives them what they want rather than maybe saying to them, you shouldn't be drinking bourbon because you're a drunk and you're homeless, and maybe save the money or whatever. But he comes back at Sousa to say that not everyone came back from the war wanting a hug. Like, it's very much of a detachedness about Agent Thompson. And I think that's why he goes for the bourbon and burger approach of let's just get this information and that's that. I don't need to spend throw him back out on the streets. That ambivalence towards his predicament, his ambivalence towards Agent Carter's predicament, and his kind of at odds view of the worlds that he has versus what Sousa has, I think.
Yeah, it looks like Sousa's trying to save the world. Sousa seems to be much more of a heroic character than Thompson. Thompson is a great investigator, there's absolutely no doubt about that, and great at his job. He's just a bit of a douche, unfortunately. But I'm really liking the performance of Chad Michael Murray. I think he's doing a great job.
Absolutely.
I'm really enjoying it.
It's a great counterpoint, actually, because actually his counterpoint is the counterpoint of that time.
Yeah.
It's very much of that moment and of that time, and it'll be interesting to see if there's any exploration as to why he does actually have those views, whether there's anything in his past. He's obviously probably been in war as well, and whether anything there has affected him so that he is like that.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see what his background is if that comes out, definitely.
Yeah. That was my point. John, what's your next point?
My next point is, again, another exchange, this time between Howard and Peggy. And again, it's another kind of commentary on society, and it's coming from Howard this time. I think in this episode, we do get a feel more for Howard Stark, as you say, child in the sweet shop in relation to him walking into the Griffith. You hear him talk about Mr. Mink, where he says he's greedy and a predictable black market smuggler. I like the fact that he's predictable and the quality of being greedy. He likes money. I can attest to that. And once Peggy finds out that the Blitzkrieg button is not this light switch, I think she calls it a glorified light switch, that, turn off the East Coast. When she finds out that it's not that, and they start to have that conversation because it ends up being a vial of Steve Rogers' blood. I like the fact that Howard justifies why he is the person he is. That he's born on the Upper East Side, and for him to move up the ranks of society, not the army, but a different form, the social ranks, for him to move up from a boy born on the Upper East Side with parents who were just sort of low-level kind of like sellers, or whether they owned a shop, we don't know. But he says his natural tendency is to lie because he has to make money, because actually for people like him to get where he is, he's had to lie in order for people to accept him in those upper echelons. It's that social movement of men within that period, and moving from a working class background into someone who is at the height of his influence in government and in the world of business. And he's had to lie, he's had to be greedy, and he's had to do that to get up the run on the ladder. And I love that, even for him, there is a ceiling, and that ceiling was money, and he had to lie to get past it and to build his fortune and to build his wealth. I think that's a really nice thing to hone in on as well, not just Peggy's predicament as a woman in that society, but actually someone coming from a working class background and building up to be a highly successful person. Obviously, before he's considered a traitor, that he's selling his weapons tech to the Russians, but that what he's had to do to get where he is. That I really liked. And of course, Peggy is still, in a sense, feeling hugely betrayed by him at this moment.
And rightly so. And I think, yes, you're right, Howard does make some great points, but Peggy is certainly not listening to him during that conversation at all. I think she starts out saying, you don't get to use my reaction to your lies as the reason for your lies,
Absolutely.
Which I think is a great little moment.
Don't get me wrong, Howard is still a douche here, because he's essentially lied to Peggy.
Yeah. But he does say, my instinct is to lie, but I shouldn't have lied to you. And that's a very specific distinction that Howard's trying to say. He does say, my instinct is this way, this is how I was brought up, this is how I made the money that I made, but I shouldn't have lied to you because I trust you implicitly, essentially. Now, what he's done in keeping Steve Rogers' blood for himself, essentially, is the other thing that really twists Peggy against him. She says to him that, I think you're a man looking out for yourself. This is something that you were keeping that vial of blood to make money for your business. You weren't doing it for the betterment of the world. I think you were doing it just to make money for Stark Industries, essentially, which is really interesting. And again, the great moment for Peggy in this episode where she says to him, thank you for reminding me who I am and of my pledge, that I was doing it for the betterment of society. Just like Steve Rogers, I'm just not as strong as he was, but thank you for reminding me that was my pledge, not to run around for you, to protect your business.
Corporate interests, exactly. No, absolutely. That difference between Howard doing it for money, doing it for his business, and Steve Rogers, Captain America, whose goal is for more pure reasons, I suppose, to help and protect the innocent, not just to feather his own nest in that sense. And I think, she really makes it clear that I need to get the stink out of the apartment, to kind of leave, get out, and don't come back. But I do like the fact that I think we had mentioned previously that Jarvis had obviously been on the phone to Howard Stark, and there was some notion that they were not telling her the whole truth. And I think Jarvis, there's a moment between Jarvis and Howard afterwards, after he's kind of been told to leave the apartment by Peggy, where Jarvis goes that he's built up calluses lying for you when he talks to Howard Stark. But in this case, he goes, you've taken her for granted. And, whether that will be repaired, we'll have to see over the course of the remaining episodes. But it is a really big sort of fracture in that alliance, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Derek, what's your next point?
My next point is actually just about the Jarvis's tell, is how I titled my next point. I really do like this episode, really enjoyed it, and I understand in TV you got to do a bit of shorthand, but the tell of Jarvis rubbing his ear is a little over the top, I thought. Essentially, every time he lies, he's supposed to rub his ear. I'm interested to see if this is going to play out in the other 4 episodes that we have, that if Jarvis is telling a lie at all, that he has to rub his ear now. Did he do it in the first 3 episodes? I don't know, but he definitely did it in the first scene that we see Jarvis when he's asked for the extra $50,000 by Minx's men. He reaches down for the case, turns on the little smoke gas that knocks them out, and says, I have got that money for you in the case, and rubs his ear. And it's really noticeable. Later on in the episode, obviously, that's how Peggy Carter finds out that he's lying to her, is that he's rubbing his ear again. So I just thought the tell was just a little bit over the top, do you think?
I think it was very obvious, but I wouldn't know how else he would do it, whether he would, rub his nose or, run his hand through his hair. I mean, it is one of those things that maybe is difficult to do. If you do it too subtly, then everyone misses it. Yeah, I know what you're saying. It was very blatant to the audience, and I mean, it is the thing that essentially gets Peggy thinking that not all is what it seems. But at the same time, if you try to be too clever and too subtle about it, then the audience doesn't see it. So I don't know how you would necessarily have done it, unless maybe the subtlety is doing it in earlier episodes rather than the start of the episode. Yeah,
that's what I'm hoping. I'm wondering if we go back and look at the other episodes, will there be moments where he's rubbed his ear and we didn't notice, for example? Will we see it in later episodes where he may have to lie again? Will he rub his ear? But for example, it seems such a big move that he would have done that while he was being interviewed in the SSR by Thompson in last week's episode, and I didn't notice that at all. So I'm interested. I'm interested to see.
I'd have to look back at those actually. Yeah, I think on the DVR recorder just to make sure and see whether he was doing that. But that's a good point. So we should definitely have a look over those and come back to them. Yeah. So Derek, do you have any notes on the episode?
Yeah, a couple of little notes. I like the moment when Jarvis and Peggy are bringing Howard back to his residence. The moment where he says, "Are you two getting along?" And he says, "Do you know Peggy does 107 push-ups a day?" To Jarvis, one-handed push-ups, isn't it? And then he says, "And do you know Jarvis's souffle is amazing, isn't it?
Yeah,
Something
yeah.
like that. That's really good. But it's the moment when you realise that, again, Peggy is a great agent, because she notices immediately that Agent Yauk and Agent Henry are both sitting outside Howard's residence. She's looking around the whole time, and that's why we know that he can't go back to his house, essentially.
Yeah.
And he has to go and stay in the Griffith. Agent Yauk is named after, I think, one of the Beastie Boys. One of the Adam Yauch is one of the Beastie Boys. So I believe that's where the name came from for his character. That's my first little note.
Very
Like that one.
very good. And of course, he's smuggled in the dumbwaiter, which is a nice little touch.
Yes,
I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Another one, obviously, the big one. Didn't put it in my points for this episode. It is just a big note. Obviously, we have Stan Lee cameo for this season.
We do.
Yeah,
getting his shoes polished.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
asking for the sports section
absolutely.
from Howard. So he actually has a moment with Howard Stark, which I thought was really nice. A little better than the cameo he did in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And the cameo that he did in Daredevil was just a photograph on the wall. So yeah. So at least we get a speaking moment for Stan Lee. Still wondering how all these cameos that he does are tying together. He seems to be about 600 different characters at this stage, you know?
Yeah, no, it's great though. It's a great little nugget in the films, I think.
Yeah.
And now obviously with the TV as well. Yeah, absolutely.
And then obviously the final note, bit we didn't mention, is that the typewriter has started to tappa just as the episode
Leviathan
finishes.
is awakened.
Yes,
absolutely.
contacting Dooley. So really looking forward to seeing that next week. John, do you have any notes about the episode?
No, I think you've pinched all my notes that I had. I mean, as I say, I think really the only other quick one was that I like the fact that Peggy gets off a punch against Howard Stark after his kind of betrayal, and not just his betrayal for lying to her about what the Blitzkrieg button does, but also just the fact that it is such a significant part of her past. You know, it's a little bit, even though it's only blood, it's a little bit of Steve Rogers, and the fact that she protects that then in her own apartment as she chisels out the wall and places it, recesses it into the wall, hangs the painting over it. But I love the fact that she gets off a deserved punch to the face for Howard Stark.
Oh, absolutely. That looked like a properly hurt, definitely, as well. I wonder if the two actors actually get on very well at all, Hayley Atwell and Dominic Cooper, because that's some punch, and it looks like she really connected with them. So,
yeah.
But I'm sure they do.
But it's not real, Derek.
That's true. It's just acting.
It's acting. They're reading lines, remembering them,
That's
and being
true.
told where to stand, as famously told by Ian McKellen in Extras, the wonderful British sitcom show about extras in film and TV roles. Yeah, really good. Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant, obviously made famous by The Office, but yeah, a really big, massive punch landed onto Howard Stark's face. Great. She knows how to handle herself, this woman.
Absolutely. But on that note, John, do you defend this episode of Agent Carter?
I do defend this episode. I would give it 3.5 Dottie Underwoods out of 5. I don't think it's necessarily been as strong as some of the others for me as a whole. I would still defend it because actually, on rewatching it, more and more things leapt out. I mean, I love this move into the Battle of Finau, into sort of Nazi Germany, and Dooley actually going to Germany to investigate the battle. And just the fact that Howard Stark is back, and I think some more sort of expose and character development of Howard Stark. Because obviously in the films, Dominic Cooper has only had relatively small parts to play, and this is really nice for him, I think. And so the more I thought about it, the more I actually liked it more. But I still think maybe it's a slight transitional element to this episode, moving from sort of the death of Krasinski and that investigation, and moving now maybe more into a Russian Cold War type of element, and still obviously hunting down Howard Stark as the primary focus. But I feel there's a slight shift in where this is going to go. So there was an element of it that felt transitionary, but then I also loved just the exchanges, and those exchanges that ultimately are a commentary on the society of that time, and those ones between Thompson and Peggy, and Howard and Peggy, and even between Thompson and Agent Sousa.
Yeah.
So I actually like this more on my second rewatch, definitely. But I do defend this episode, and I would give it 3.5 dotties out of 5. Derek, do you defend this episode?
I do, but I definitely wouldn't want to see 5 Dottie Underwoods. My gosh. She could take out
The
an army like
clones.
that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yes, fantastic episode. I'm really liking the connections, and I think, as you say, one of the big things about this episode is some more depth for Howard Stark. Really, for better or worse, Howard Stark kind of gets his reputation and gets a lot of the love for the character from Tony Stark, from the portrayal of Tony Stark by Robert Downey Jr. He does a great job of just, playing that quite easily and playing it off quite easily in the Captain America, the First Avenger. But he does a great job here of just embodying that character really well, and we get to see a lot of interesting sides for Howard Stark. And obviously the fact that, he has a way of justifying to himself why he's a womanizer, why he's a cheat, why he's a liar. He justifies it to himself, just like any good character in TV or movie history. They know exactly why their character is the nicest character in the world and why what they're doing is right, and they've done a really good job here. Having our Stan Lee cameo is fantastic for the show.
Absolutely loved that as well. Yeah. Really good little highlight of any Marvel show, whether big screen or small, I reckon.
Yeah, and one huge thing for me this episode, obviously, is having the Mink character introduced, chasing down Peggy Carter, having a great plan to get into her hotel, or into the Griffith, I suppose, getting up to her room and then being taken out instantly by Dottie Underwood, which is a great thing to happen in any show because you're not expecting it at all. You think he's going to be the big bad for the series, and he's gone.
Absolutely.
In one fell whip of the legs. Fantastic. Really good stuff in this episode. Really enjoyed it. But I'm really looking forward to next week's episode.
I know you are. I do. I think there's a Howling Commandos.
They're different guys. The Howling Commandos are different guys. They've got a werewolf in their team. But yes, Nick Fury's partners from... Our Sergeant Fury's partners from World War II,
yeah.
The Howling Commandos, including Dum Dum Dugan. He is Dugan, he's not Dugan, because it's a U, right? And the rest of the Howling Commandos are going to be on next week. I can't wait to see what happens.
Yeah, that is going to be really good fun, I reckon. To see the Howling Commandos back, definitely.
Absolutely, yeah, really looking forward to that.
And of course, it's just for us to say thank you again so much for listening. We'll be back in our next episode for the fantastic 24th episode of Defenders TV podcast, where we will be discussing, chatting, reviewing the Fantastic Four movie, the reboot of this old Marvel property. One of the first groupings of fantastic people doing fantastic things in a fantastic world. And so it'll be really interesting. And then, of course, we will be back after that with our next episode, which will be looking at episode 5 of Agent Carter. And
we're lining up the numbers quite well with Fantastic 24 and Agent Carter episode 5. Our episode 25, we're lining up the numbers very well.
Exactly.
And hopefully, we're going to cross our fingers. Irene and Chris are going to be joining us again, the full Defenders team, coming back together for the Fantastic Four. This is the 4th iteration of the Fantastic Four now. We've had 3 previous films. We had one you can see on YouTube, which was made by Roger Corman. Really terrible, no special effects, just basically to keep the rights away from Marvel. And we've had 2 Fantastic Four films starring Chris Evans, who is obviously Captain America.
Exactly.
And now we have the reboot starring Rooney Mara as Invisible Girl. Looking forward to seeing that.
And you'll be able to catch that on www.defenderstvpodcast.com/iTunes, or search Defenders TV Podcast in any other good podcast catcher, such as Stitcher or Player FM. If you see the movie between now and next Saturday, the 8th of August, send in your thoughts. What did you think of the movie? Did you like it? Did you enjoy it? Did it live up to any of the hype, or maybe the issues that are circulating around the film? Please let us know. Send in your thoughts at feedback@defenderstvpodcast.com, and we'll be happy to bring those up and discuss them in our fantastic 24th episode.
Yes, and if you're not going to Fantastic Four, if you're not going to see it, we've heard a couple of people say that they aren't interested in seeing it at all. Let us know why. We'd love to talk about some of the reasons why people aren't going to see this film, when obviously the Marvel films are pretty huge. So anyway, come check out our episode. We'll be out next week, and we'll be back with Agent Carter and the Howling Commandos saying wahoo next week.
Wahoo. Thank you so much for listening.
Yep, shut up English, you talk too much.
Bye.